What's up guys, Asian here again with another build video, and today we're going to be going over the Stamina Templar. So the Stamina Templar has seemed to have gotten shafted once again in the Elsweyr patch. DPS in general has gone up for pretty much all Stamina DPS due to the introduction of the Lokkestiiz set, but there has been a change to Templar's Power of the Light ability, which makes it better off being run on healers and actually results in an overall DPS loss when it's run on a Stamina Templar. So currently Stamina Templars are among the lowest DPS when it comes to Stamina DPS. They still outparse Magic DPS in general, but Stamina Templars are definitely not really in a good spot right now when it comes to just raw, pure DPS. Now, some groups may find it easier to run a Stamina Templar for Power of the Light rather than a healer, just because Stamina Templars can easily put it into their rotation, even though it is going to end up being a overall DPS loss to the Templar. The increase in Power of the Light uptime might end up being a overall group DPS increase, which may offset the personal DPS loss that the Templar ends up seeing. So just like the rest of our build videos, we'll be going over gear, skills, attributes, everything you need to know to basically recreate this build yourself. I'll talk a little bit about the different sets that you might want to run rather than the gear setup that I have right here. It's all going to depend on what DLCs you have access to, what expansions you have access to, what fight that you are going to go into, things like that. So I will be covering a lot of different sets here. Then we'll go over our rotation, kind of talk about it a little bit, the theory behind it on a 6 million dummy, and then we will do a full 21 million raid dummy parse so we can get a point in comparison to other Stamina DPS. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started here first with our gear. So we are starting off with monster helms, which is Velidreth. So Velidreth is still the strongest monster helm set in the game for Stamina DPS. There's really been no other monster helm that has come in to really usurp Velidreth from its top position. You will notice we have a max health enchant here on the helm, and that is because we are running regen food. We're running either our Tam Takeaway Broth or Deepest Khorne Throne. So we do need to have that additional max health to make up for the loss of health for running those foods compared to running a buy-stat food. The max health was nerfed in Elsweyr. Moving on, for our body set, we have Relequen, still the strongest single target set in the game for Stamina DPS. Perfected armor can be obtained from Veteran and Cloud Rest in Somerset, either the +1, +2, or +3 configuration. The normal version of Relequen's, the imperfect version, drops from normal Cloud Rest as well as any of the side bosses. So the difference between them is that 5-piece max stamina bonus, so not that big of a difference between imperfect and perfect Relequen, just because stamina DPS, generally speaking, do not have very high max stamina modifiers, but the perfected version is still going to be the stronger option here. The imperfect version, though, is still a perfectly viable alternative if you cannot farm Veteran Cloud Rest on a +1 or above. For our front bar set, we are running Perfected Lokkestiiz. This comes from Sunspire, Vet, Sunspire, any of the bosses. Doesn't have to be hard mode at all, it can be normal Vet, and you'll be able to get the perfected version of this set here. The imperfect version is still a pretty strong set. You do lose that weapon crit on the 5-piece, so a little bit of a bigger gap between imperfect and perfect Lokkestiiz compared to on Relequen. But imperfect Lokkestiiz is still a very strong set to run, so if you cannot farm Vet Sunspire, getting the imperfect version from normal Sunspire is still an option there if you have access to the Elsweyr expansion. For our front bar weapons, we're going with double daggers. We have sharpened on the main hand and offhand. You can also go with nirn on the main hand and just adjust your CPs to make up for the loss in penetration. We are running double Ravage Health Poisons. The poison bug was changed, so this no longer impacts the strength of your back bar enchant, so we're able to run damage health poisons with no consequence at all. For our back bar, we're still running a Maelstrom Bow infused with a weapon damage enchant here. Now for our jewelry traits and enchants, we have 3 Bloodthirsty and 3 weapon damage enchants. You can also go with Infused as your enchant of trait of choice here. Just makes your weapon damage enchant a little bit stronger. Gives you a little bit more DPS overall throughout the entire fight versus Bloodthirsty, which gives you a very large boost towards the end of the fight. If you don't have access to jewelry crafting, you will have to stick with just Robust. Then armor, all divines. We already talked about that 1 health enchant on the large piece, but the rest are running max stamina enchants here. But we're still going with all divines here. Infused is not as strong on stamina DPS as it is on Magicka DPS because you don't have as much max stamina modifiers as Magicka DPS do with Max Magica. Now, in terms of other sets you're going to want to have on hand, first we're going to go over crafted gear, and then we'll talk about the other sets in more or less alphabetical order. So there are a few sets here, crafted sets, that you might want to have on hand. Just kind of hold you over while you're farming your better sets here, Lokkestiiz and Relequen, for example. First set is going to be Hunding's Rage. This is a base game set, requires you to know 6 traits to craft it yourself. You can also just get someone to craft it for you or buy it off of guild traders. Very classic, very standard set here, 299 weapon damage on a 5-piece. Best suited as a body set, not really useful as a front bar set because you will lose the 5, 4, and 5-piece when you're on your back bar, assuming you're running Maelstrom Bow. If you double bar, it's not obviously going to be an issue. But if you are running a Masters or Maelstrom Bow in the back bar, you will have to want to run Hunding's Rage as a body set. Then you have Mechanical Acuity. This is kind of seeing a resurgence here just because of the buff to the Shadow Mundus. Not quite as strong on stamina DPS compared to magic DPS because you do have higher crit chance as a stamina DPS, but still very strong nonetheless. The 3 pieces doesn't do you any favor because it is just spell damage, not very useful on a stamina DPS obviously, but the 5-piece is pretty strong, gives you 100% crit chance for 5 seconds every 18 seconds, so pretty nice overall. But this can be used as a front bar set, but not quite as strong on the magic DPS because you do have relatively higher crit chance as a stamina DPS due to daggers, running your daggers. Now over onto our dungeon set here. So moving on down the list here, we have Leviathan. This is a base game set from Crypt of Hearts, just adds up a bunch of weapon crit here. So very similar to Hunding's, ideally you have this run on the body so you never drop the weapon crit when you swap bars. That being said, because it is weapon crit rather than weapon damage, you can run this on the front bar with a little bit more effectiveness than if you were to run Hunding's Rage as a front bar set. So you can run this on front bar or body. Ideally it should be on the body, but you can run this on the front bar. You will see a little bit of DPS loss, but not that big of a deal here because it is crit rather than damage. From there, you don't really have many other dungeon sets here. I do want to give a shout out to Essence Thief, which is a pretty nice set. This comes from White Gold Tower, so you don't have access to the Imperial City DLC to grab this. This was changed Elsweyr, so when you deal the damage with a light attack now, you have a 100% chance to proc it. The Essence now procs a lot closer to the boss, so a lot easier to get now. It heals for 3900, restores 3900 stamina, and increases your damage done by 10% for 10 seconds, so a little bit of a nerf to the damage done, but very strong for heal and sustain. I do know somebody who has tested out Essence Thief on a dummy and found it to be a little bit lackluster in overall DPS, but their sustain was absolutely phenomenal that way. So this is a nice option to get if you can get that proc very consistently. If you're not able to collect the proc, then obviously this ends up losing a lot of damage. Then you have Sogman's Warband. This comes from Frostvault, so do not have access to the Wrathstone DLC to grab this set. This set is a little bit weaker than Advanced Yokeda when it comes to raw crit chance. It only gives 1290 on the 5-piece compared to 2000, but it also gives you minor force when you have all 10 stacks going. So it basically allows you to no longer use Rearming Trap. You can drop it from your rotation and you gain back an additional global cooldown. There's that benefit there from Sogman's. It also adds some physical penetration on the 4-piece, so you can invest a little bit less into piercing and put those CP points into other places there. So pretty nice set to have on hand here. Going over a couple of overland sets here, there are a few medium overland sets that might be useful for you. Spriggan's Thorn is very nice for trash pulls. You can find this in Bankurai base game set, farm it or buy it. Up to you. So it just adds a bunch of physical penetration. It's obviously going to be very useful as the front bars, I should say body set, so you get penetration on both bars. It's going to be very useful for trash pulls, where instances where you're not going to be able to get major fracture on everything or minor fracture on everything. It just gives you some really great damage in trash pulls overall. Moving on here. There is pretty much one other set you want to talk about. It's going to be Briarheart. This comes from Hrothgar. You can buy it off of guild traders. You can farm it yourself if you have access to the zone itself. When you deal critical damage, you basically have a chance to increase your weapon damage by a certain amount, 449 when golded out for 10 seconds. And while this is active, you also get some additional healing whenever you crit as well. So really nice set. In terms of just raw weapon damage you get from the 5-piece, it is equal to Hunting's Rage, a little bit weaker in fact, but because it is a proc and can carry over to your back bar, you can run this as a front bar set and it'll be stronger than Hunting's Rage because it carries over to your back bar. So Briarheart, definitely a good set to pick up if you are kind of still farming for Lokkestiiz or Relequen. And then for medium armor trial sets here, there is potentially one trial set you want to hold on to. Oops, that's not the right box here. One set you want to hold on to, and that's going to be Two-Fang Snake as well as War Machine. So Two-Fang Snake, pretty much the exact same deal as Spriggan, just a little bit stronger. Comes from Sanctum Ophidia. So base game set here. You do have to farm it, you can't buy it off guild traders, but it pretty much functions the same way as Spriggan. It's just additional penetration for Trash Pulse. And you have War Machine. So as a Templar, you're going to be running your ultimate, your Empowering Sweeps ultimate. That costs 72 ultimate, so very, very cheap, which pairs very nicely with War Machine. So when you use an ultimate, you and your closest 2 allies gain Major Slayer for 10 seconds. So really, really nice, particularly in 4-man content, to give pretty much all your DPS that Major Slayer buff. Now, if your DPS are running Lokkestiiz, then War Machine is not going to be quite as strong, but in well-organized groups, Slayer stacks are still a thing while people are farming for Lokkestiiz, so still definitely a set you want to keep on hand. A special shout out to Vicious Ophidian, also known as Vicious Serpent. Very nice for overall sustain here. Craglorn Trial, any of the 3 Craglorns, so base game set, very nice holdover set. Still gives you that minor Slayer, gives you some nice sustain bonus from the cost reduction. This is very good as a body set. You can also run this as a front bar if you'd like, but definitely better off as a body set here. Still relevant in this day and age, just kind of overshadowed now by a lot of the other sets in the game. War Machine, Relequen, Lokkestiiz, they're all stronger than Vicious Ophidian, but definitely a nice holdover set if you're still farming for those sets there. For our Monster Helm sets, you do have 1 or 2 Monster Helm sets that you could use as a replacement for Velidreth if you do not have it. First one's going to be Selene's. This is the base game set from Selene's Web, very easy to get here. The 1-piece is not quite as strong compared to Velidreth, max dam is not as strong as weapon damage. The 2-piece, the proc damage actually does outpace Velidreth's, but it only hits 1 enemy. Velidreth can hit multiple enemies because there's 3 spores that proc with Velidreth. Plus, if the boss has a large enough hitbox, all 3 spores, 2 or 3 of them actually can hit the same boss from Velidreth. So Velidreth can actually do more damage with the proc set in the ideal conditions. But Selene's is probably the best option if you can't get Velidreth's. Other set here is gonna be, find it here, I don't think it's out. First I want to talk about Krog. This is a set that you might see being run as a 1-piece for the physical penetration combined with 1-piece Velidreth, for example, or the weapon damage for fights where Velidreth is not going to be as strong. For example, if you're in a very mobile fight perhaps, or the boss is moving around a lot, having that 1-piece physical pen and 1-piece weapon damage might be better off overall because there aren't really any good ranged monster helm sets for melee DPS, obviously. The 2-piece is not actually very strong. It procs very often because it is procs off any damage, but it is not a very strong proc itself. So it's mostly used for that 1-piece physical penetration. Another monster helm set that I want to talk about I actually have out already. That's called Slime Cross. So this gives you minor berserk. So if you are in a progression group where your healers might not be able to give you minor berserk all the time, or you're in a pug group and you can't really trust your healers to give you minor berserk, you can wear Slime Craw instead. Minor berserk is a very strong buff, and in certain situations it'll give you more damage than Velidreth or Selene's will, depending on what minor berserk uptime you can expect to get from your healers. So that pretty much covers it for all of our sets. Moving on to our character sheet, I am a Dark Elf. Dark Elves are one of the 2 best races for stamina DPS. The other best race is going to be Orcs. So Orcs get 2000 max stamina, 1000 max health, and 258 additional weapon damage. So as an Orc, you don't need to put that max health enchant on a large beast. You can just run straight up stamina enchants instead because you have the additional max health there. Dark Elves get 1875 stamina and magicka and 258 spell and weapon damage. So if you want to play a Magic Templar, kind of flip-flop between the 2 of them, Dark Elves are a very solid racial option. There are a few other options here. What I like to call the sustained races, Red Guards and Bosmer, also known as the Wood Elves. Both races get 2000 max stamina. They do not get the additional weapon damage that Dark Elves or Orcs get. Instead, they get some additional sustain bonuses. So Red Guards get back 990 stamina whenever they deal direct damage. I believe it's every 5 or 6 seconds. and Bosmer get 258 additional stamina regen. So both of these have very strong sustain bonuses, but they do lose out in raw DPS because they do not have that additional weapon damage bonus. Imperials, if you have access to the Imperial Edition, are another good option. They also get 2000 max stamina, they get 2000 max health as well, so you don't have to run that health enchant. They get 3% cost reduction to all abilities, and get 333 magic health and stamina back whenever they deal damage. Again, I believe it's every 5 or 6 seconds. So, some nice sustain there. If you also want to play a Templar tank on the side, then the Imperials are also a very strong racial option for you there. And then you have the Jack of all trades, Master of none race, the Khajiits. The Khajiits get 825 magic health and stamina, 85 magic and stamina regen, 100 health regen. They get 10% additional critical healing done, and 10% additional critical damage done. If you want to play a healer, or a stamina DPS, or magic DPS, or even a tank, Khajiits are a very good option because of their very well-balanced racial passives. Moving on to our attributes, we have all of our points in the stamina here. We are able to make up our health running a large health enchant on a large piece, or we can be an orc or an imperial for additional health racial passive there, so we can put all points into stamina. If you're not an orc or an imperial, you can of course put some points from stamina into health if you would like to gain some survivability. Being dead does not do any favors in the DPS department, so it might be worth making that trade-off there. We are running the Shadow Mundus, it's still the strongest Mundus stone in the game for DPS. We're a vampire for the 10% additional stamina regen and magic regen, just helps out our overall sustain by a good amount. You do take more damage from fire, so just keep that in mind if you are in a fight where there are mechanics that do deal fire damage. You will need to be a little bit more on your toes, so to speak, in order to get out of those mechanics. And then we are running our Artaeum Takeaway Broth. This is regen food, so max health, max stamina, health regen, and stamina regen. We're just not able to sustain bi-stat food on a Stamina Templar, so we do need to run regen food. You can also run Dubious Command Thorn instead. It'll give you less stats overall, but it is an option if you cannot get Artaeum Takeaway Broth. It is fairly expensive to make or to buy. Now for our skill bars. Starting off with the front bar, we have Rending Slashes, Biting Jabs, Blazing Spear, Silver Leash, Rearming Trap, Flawless Dawnbreaker. On our back bar, we have Razor Caltrops, Poison Injection, Endless Hail, Restoring Focus, Rearming Trap, and Empowering Sweep as our ultimate. Not much in terms of sort of changes you can make. You could potentially go with Rolling Blades in place of Silver Leash or Rearming Trap if you would like, but Biting Jabs, generally speaking, is going to be a little bit stronger than Whirling Blades is. Whirling Blades is going to be stronger for AoE damage, but for pure single target DPS, running Biting Jabs throughout the entire fight is going to be just a hair stronger on average. Going over our CP points, CP cap is still 810. It has not changed at all over the past few patches here while they're looking at the champion point system. It gives us 270 points across each of our different constellations. For our green constellations, we have 100 Mooncalf, 75 Tenacity, that gives 95 remaining points. 31 Shadow Word, 31 Tumbling, and 33 Warlord is what I have. You can play around a little bit with your green CPs. You can drop Mooncalf down to 75 to give you 25 more points to play around with. You can also put 100 points into Tenacity for the additional sustain from your heavy attacks. It's kind of up to you how you want to play around with that. For our blue CPs, this particular setup assumes that you're running 2 sharpened daggers and you have all of the debuffs in the game active. So you have Torg's Infused Crusher, you have Alkosh, and you have Major and Minor Fracture. If you are anticipating lower uptimes or you are running a Nirn main hand, you will need to shift some points out of these other nodes and put them back into Piercing, or you can make a penetration by running some other sets, for example Zogvins, or you can run something like Krogs. So I have 64 Mighty, 37 Piercing, 61 Precise Strikes, 56 Thaumaturge, 52 Master at Arms. If you want to drop some points and put them into Piercing, you can drop Mighty down to 56 or 49. Precise Strikes can be dropped down to 56 or 52. Thaumaturge can be dropped down to 52 or 48. And Master at Arms can be dropped down to 48 or 44. Those are the next 2 jump points for each of those nodes, which should give you some more points to put into Piercing. Finally, our red CPs, this is a generalist approach, so this will give you very good mitigation across all content in the game, but it's not what I would call maximizing mitigation across any singular piece of content, so you will need to shift some red CP points around to maximize your mitigation. 81 Ironclad, 61 Thick-Skinned, 64 Hardy, and 64 Elemental Defender. Now just remember that I did forget one set here. I don't know how I managed to forget it, but it is going to be the classic Advancing Yokeda, also known as Berserking Warrior from Helross Citadel. This was changed in Elsweyr, so that it now lasts for 6 seconds. You have a little bit more time on your back bar now. So still a nice set to hold on to. Lokkestiiz does end up beating it out, but for those of you guys who have not yet farmed out your Lokkestiiz, Advanced Yokeda is still a very, very strong set. It is second in line to Lokkestiiz, probably matches Imperfect Lokkestiiz in terms of damage potential here, once you account for the Major Slayer. So if you still have Advanced Yokeda, you can certainly still use it on a Stamina Templar. Alright, so now that is all of the build information, so now we can talk about a rotation itself. So you'll notice here that we did end up dropping Power of the Light, and that is because of 2 reasons. First, the Minor Breach, Minor Fracture from Power of the Light has been buffed. The duration is now 9 seconds. The damage component itself is still 6 seconds long though. The increased duration in Minor Breach and Minor Fracture basically makes it better for healers to run it. It's a little bit easier for healers to run it now, so we can take it off our bars that way. Second reason is the bug still exists for Purifying Light and Power of the Light, where if your group ends up dealing too much damage before the second proc goes off, basically when the 6-second duration expires and that second tick of damage happens, you actually will end up not getting that second tick at all. So you actually don't get that second tick of damage, which ends up being a DPS loss, obviously. So until that bug is fixed, Power of the Light and Purifying Light will probably not see its way onto any Templar DPS. Rotation itself is pretty much static, so this is pretty static rotation itself. Pretty much always going to be the exact same rotation back and forth here. So just to give you guys an idea of what rotation looks like here, very simple. Start off with your buffs and your back bar. So then you do your dots here on your front bar, you do 2 biting jabs. You can do 3 if you'd like this, 3. You can do 2 or 3, depends on whether you're comfortable with some downtime like the back bar dots. Probably do 3 very comfortably, unless you have to do something like put down your rune and your ultimate, in which case you probably only have time for 2. It is going to vary a little bit, but for the most part it is going to be static. When we do the 21 million dummy parse, you will see what I mean when I say it's a static rotation. You're basically going to be casting your Restoring Focus and your ultimate every other time you're on your back bar. So it basically works out to be basically 4 blocks. So you have back bar, front bar, front bar, and you basically rotate through them as needed. So it's a static rotation. If you would like, I can also write it down in the description below for you guys, so you guys can get an idea of what the rotation actually looks like. So now we're going to do a 21 million dummy parse, so you guys can get an idea of what raid DPS is going to look like. It's going to be a little bit inflated because we are getting 100% major force, which is not realistic, but this does end up giving us a lot of the raid buffs overall. And so this allows us to kind of standardize our parses between all the different classes in the game. The only class you can't really compare this to is going to be the Stamina Necromancer, because Stamina Necromancers do have access to major vulnerability unique to them, so you do need to adjust the Stamina Necromancer parse downward to kind of account for that, or adjust our parse upward to account for the major vulnerability uptime. But you can compare this to the other 4 classes in the game perfectly fine, because all the buffs are standardized in this particular parse here. Also gives us an idea of the overall sustain you can expect to see if you're getting shards on cooldown. So let's go ahead and get started here, and I will try to narrate throughout the parse here so you guys can get an idea of what I'm doing here with the parse. So remember, if you're running the Lokkestiiz front bar instead of on the body, you will need to make sure to use all your synergies on your front bar here. A little bit of delay there for some strange reason. Button click didn't quite go off here. Here is pretty much static. You're always casting your Restoring Focus every other time you're on your back bar. ultimate every other time on the back bar as well. So in this instance, the channel restoring focus and ultimate do not line up. So you can see here, I'll never be having them be active at the same time. So I can basically use 3 biting jabs each time. If for whatever reason they did end up lining up, then for example you would be doing restoring focus and your ultimate on the same time, then you would only be able to have time to do 2 biting jabs rather than 3. But in this static rotation here, this particular scenario, we're able to do 3 biting jabs each time we're on our front bar. So I do recommend trying to offset your restoring focus and your ultimate so you can get 3 biting jabs off every time you're on your front bar. Get my button pressing go off here. We'll still do 3. Now we don't have any sort of execute, so once we hit execute range, our rotation doesn't change at all. So even though it does say start to use beam because we are on a Templar and we do have the How to Beam add-on, obviously we're not using J-Beam at all because we're stamina DPS. One thing I will point out here, you might have heard the potion ping go off, but I didn't actually drink a potion. That's because I was in the middle of the jabs channel. So if you're in the middle of the jabs channel, you can't actually drink potions because you can't drink potions during channel abilities. See if we can break 80. Pretty sure we can break 80 today. So I'm just gonna spam towards the end here. There we go, we managed to break 80. Sometimes I'm not able to really break 80, but in this instance we were able to do it. So overall DPS is 81.4k. Not that bad, but again it is lower than a lot of the other stamina DPS right now in the game. And part of that is, again, we are losing DPS from the bug from Power Over Light. If that bug was fixed, we would actually see a pretty sizable jump in DPS overall. But because of that bug, particularly in raids, it's not really that big of an issue in 4-man content, but in trials, especially high-end groups, it's a very, very prevalent bug there. So pretty nasty overall drop to our DPS. It's not a new bug, but with the new buff to the duration to Minor Breach, Minor Fracture, making it a lot better for Templar healers to run Power of the Light, it's not really doing stamina Templars any favors. But we're still doing really good DPS, so 81.4k, really, really nice overall. Jab is very, very strong here. And the Burning Light proc is also really, really nice as well. But even though Blazing Spear is not doing a lot of damage, it's doing only 2% of our damage, it's contributing a lot to our Burning Light procs, which are quite strong overall. You can see here it is just behind Razor Caltrops in terms of overall DPS, and above Poison Injection in terms of overall DPS contribution as well. So really nice to get those nice Burning Light procs from Blazing Spear. And you can see here, Poison's still quite strong, so when you combine them together, it makes it about 3.2% of our DPS, or about 26, just over 2600 DPS, so putting it above Empowering Sweep and just below our bow light attacks. So that's going to be it for this build video. Hope you guys found this informative. If you guys have any questions about the build itself, please feel free to leave them down in the comment section below. I'll try to answer them to the best of my ability. Again, hope you guys found this informative, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.